The first thing they sell at an Omega auction isn't your body, it's your name. Mine disappeared with a soft chime. 1 second it was there, glowing on the glass panel in front of me, Rick, Omega, Scout, and the next it folded into a line of legal code, stamped and sealed by a pack that no longer wanted to say it out loud. No speeches, no explanations. Just a digital signature from the Alpha Council of my former pack, crisp and impersonal, like a receipt. Transaction complete. The glass booth hummed quietly, sealing me inside. If you ever want to understand how the world really works, stand naked. Not literally. Just socially, in a box and let people put numbers on you. The booths lined the underground hall like aquariums, each lit with cold white light, each containing someone trying very hard not to look like prey. Concrete floors, reinforced glass, cameras everywhere. The air smelled like metal, antiseptic and money that had never done an honest day's work. I kept my shoulders loose and my expression bored. Panic is expensive. Indifference, oddly enough, can be a bargaining chip. The auctioneer didn't bother with theatrics. No smiles, no patter. Just data scrolling across screens in a calm voice that treated lives like inventory. Omega. Urban reconnaissance. Cross-pack operative. No current claim. No current pack either, but that part was implied. The first bids came fast. I felt them before I heard them. Alpha presence presses against your skin like static electricity. Too many of them in one place made the air thick, heavy with hunger and calculation. Some were curious. Some were predatory. A few were already deciding what I'd be useful for once they stripped me down to function. I catalogued them out of habit. Old reflex. That one smelled like gun oil and impatience, security muscle. That one like polished leather and fear, corporate alpha compensating. That one, smug, dangerous.
If this story caught you, subscribe. More are waiting.
Thought he was smarter than everyone else in the room. I swallowed my anger and wrapped it in humor. Because if I didn't laugh internally, I'd do something very loud and very stupid. Congratulations, Rick, I told myself. You've officially been downgraded from independent problem solver to lot number. The numbers climbed. I stopped listening. Instead, I focused on breathing. On staying inside my body. On not letting the humiliation crawl any deeper than my ribs. I'd been betrayed before, by people, by systems. But there was something uniquely brutal about watching your pack erase you with a signature and then sell the consequences. Then the room shifted. Not louder. Quieter. The bids stuttered. A few cut off mid-number. Like someone had pulled the plug on their confidence. I didn't need scent or instinct to know someone important had arrived. You feel power like that. The way you feel pressure change before a storm. He didn't announce himself. Didn't push forward. He simply took a seat near the back, where the shadows were thickest, and folded his hands like a man attending a meeting he already owned. KILLIAN BLACK. I knew the name the way you know the name of a city you hope never to visit. BlackWard systems. Security contracts. Private intelligence. A man whose reach didn't need to be loud to be absolute. He was dressed simply, dark coat, tailored lines, no excess. No visible weapons. No show of dominance. Which somehow made him worse. The auctioneer glanced at him, hesitated for half a second too long. The bidding resumed, shakier now. Higher numbers. Desperation creeping in. KILLIAN BLACK didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't look at my body. When the auctioneer finally cleared his throat and said, "Final call," the room exhaled all at once. That was when KILLIAN lifted his gaze. Not to the panel. Not to the data. To me. His eyes were dark, unreadable. Not hungry, not dismissive. Assessing. Like he was looking at a locked door and deciding whether it was worth opening. "I'll take him," he said. No bid. No counter. No flourish. Just certainty. The auctioneer froze, then nodded quickly, relief and fear mixing on his face. Confirmed. The glass around me disengaged with a soft hiss. KILLIAN didn't approach. Didn't reach out. Didn't touch me at all. He stood, turned, and walked away, as if it were already understood that I would follow. I should have been relieved. I should have been furious. Mostly, I was confused. Because I'd been bought. But I hadn't been taken. And as I stepped out of the booth and into the cold air of the underground hall, I realized something that made my pulse quicken, not with fear but with a sharp, dangerous curiosity. Whatever KILLIAN BLACK wanted from me, it wasn't my body. And that scared me a hell of a lot more. The BlackWard car didn't smell like dominance. That was the first thing that threw me. No sharp alpha musk flooding the cabin. No territorial pressure crawling over my skin. Just clean leather. Faint ozone from the tinted glass, and the quiet hum of an engine that probably cost more than my last apartment. I slid into the back seat on instinct, spine straight, hands visible. Standard procedure. You don't get sold at an underground auction without learning how to minimize damage. The door closed with a soft final click. KILLIAN Black sat across from me, not beside me. He hadn't looked back once since leaving the market. No grab at my wrist. No guiding hand at my spine. No subtle reminder of ownership. I waited for it. The order. The touch. The mark. It never came. The car pulled into motion, smooth and silent. City lights smearing across the glass like watercolor bruises. The contrast hit me hard enough to make my jaw tighten. 10 minutes ago I'd been standing in a concrete fish tank while strangers priced my usefulness. Now I was riding through the city in climate-controlled silence with one of the most powerful alphas on the continent, who was pointedly pretending I wasn't an object that needed to be handled. Suspicion crept in where relief should have been. KILLIAN opened a slim tablet and slid it across the narrow space between us. Not close enough to touch. Not far enough to dismiss. A contract, he said. His voice was even. Controlled. Not cold exactly, just precise, like every word had passed inspection before being released. I didn't pick up the tablet right away. Usually, I said lightly, this is where someone tells me where to kneel. He didn't react. Didn't bristle. Didn't smirk. Just waited. Fine. I took the tablet. The text was dense, clean, brutally legal. No flowery dominance language. No ownership clauses hidden in poetic phrasing. I scanned fast, my mind snapping into work mode despite the situation. Independent asset. Operational autonomy within defined parameters. No bonding. No claiming. No cent marking. Compensation outlined in numbers that made my eyebrows climb before I forced them back down. Clear exit clauses. Clear protections. I looked up slowly. You don't usually buy omegas to let them breathe. KILLIAN's gaze lifted from the city outside the window and settled on me. Not invasive. Not dismissive. Measuring. I don't buy omegas, he said. I buy solutions. There it was. Not kindness. Not mercy. Intent. I laughed under my breath, unable to help it. That's almost flattering. Almost, he agreed. The car took a turn, banking smoothly onto a private ramp that led upward, away from the streets, toward towers of glass and steel that scraped the night sky. BlackWard territory. I scrolled again. Slower this time. Every clause was a boundary. Every line was a fence, clearly marked. It was the most respectful cage I'd ever seen, and that made my skin itch. What's the catch? I asked. Because there's always a catch. KILLIAN didn't answer right away. He folded his hands, resting them loosely against his knee. Still no movement toward me. Still no pressure. You work, he said finally. You observe, you report. You don't lie to me. And if I do, then we're done. No threats. No raised voice. Just fact. The car slowed as we entered a secured tunnel, lights flickering rhythmically across the interior. For a moment his reflection overlapped mine in the glass. Two figures framed side by side, never touching. I felt the dissonance settle deep in my chest. This wasn't ownership. This was recruitment. And somehow, that unsettled me more than chains ever had. I signed. The tablet chimed softly. KILLIAN inclined his head once, a sharp, precise motion. Welcome to BlackWard. As the car carried us deeper into his world, I leaned back against the leather seat and let suspicion curl tight and ready beneath my ribs. Because no one like KILLIAN Black did anything without a reason. And whatever his reason was, it hadn't been written into the contract. The city at night always tells the truth. You just have to know how to listen. Neon bled into puddles on cracked pavement. Sirens echoed 3 blocks over, distant enough to be background noise instead of a warning. I moved through it all the way I always had, light on my feet, head up, presence blurred just enough to be forgettable. Between packs is where people talk. On paper, BlackWard gave me clearance, access points, a tidy digital map of influence. In reality, information still lived in alleyways and half-lit bars where the drinks were cheap and the loyalty cheaper. My first stop was a rooftop 3 stories above a noodle shop that pretended not to be a front. The fire escape rattled under my weight, metal protesting softly. I liked roofs. They reminded me there was always another way out. Thought you were dead, said Lena, a beta with eyes like cut glass and a voice that never rose above board. She leaned against the ledge, smoking something that smelled illegal in at least 2 districts. Disappointing, I know, I said. I had plans for the afterlife. She snorted. Market said you got sold. Market says a lot of things. Her gaze sharpened. You claimed? No. That earned me a real look. Surprise flickered, quick and unguarded. Huh, she said. That's new. Everything was new, apparently. I traded her a data chip for a rumor. Standard exchange. The rumor involved a shipment rerouted twice without documentation. Security clearance that shouldn't have existed. Interesting. From there I dropped down into the veins of the city, cutting through back streets and slipping into an underground bar where the lights were low and the music loud enough to drown out regret. Old contacts recognized me in stages: disbelief, relief, curiosity. Rick, said Jonah, sliding me a drink I didn't ask for. Beta. Former runner. The kind of man who smiled too much because fear had once lived too close to his spine. Jonah, I replied. Still alive. Bold strategy. He chuckled nervously. Heard you vanished. I took a vacation. With who? I sipped the drink. Cheap. Strong. BlackWard. He choked. I smiled sweetly. Careful. That'll kill you faster than the alcohol. Information trickled in the way it always did. Half-truths wrapped in jokes, warnings disguised as gossip. Routes compromised. Deals intercepted. Alphas complaining about security failures that made no sense. Patterns began to form. Back at a high vantage point. Another rooftop, this one overlooking a transit hub. I pulled up the BlackWard data on my burner. Cross-referenced it with what I'd heard. The overlap was uncomfortable. Someone had access to internal movement schedules. Not hacked. Not forced. Given. I leaned against the cool concrete and laughed softly to myself. Of course the problem wasn't outside. It never is. The market wasn't just reacting, it was anticipating. Someone inside BlackWard was feeding it just enough truth to stay profitable without burning the source. A leak. I felt the familiar click in my chest as confidence slid back into place. This was my element. Not cages. Not contracts. This. Movement. Connection. The space between people where secrets get careless. My comm buzzed. Report, came Killian's voice. Calm. Unhurried. Someone's selling your future, I said. And they're doing it with your clearance. A pause. Not surprise. Not denial. Names? He asked. Not yet, I said. But they're watching me. That's expected. I raised an eyebrow, even though he couldn't see it. You always throw new assets into live fire? Only the ones who can move. I smiled despite myself. As I cut across the rooftops toward my next contact. The city stretching wide and dangerous beneath me, something settled into my bones that I hadn't felt since before my pack signed my name away. I wasn't prey tonight. I was a problem. And somewhere in the system someone was about to realize they'd underestimated the Omega who worked between packs. BlackWard's operations center felt like the opposite of the market, where the auction had been all concrete and hunger. This place was glass, light and control. Floor-to-ceiling screens curved along the walls, each one alive with moving data, routes, feeds, live security overlays. The air was cool, filtered, and sharp enough to keep you awake whether you wanted to be or not. People moved with purpose. Alphas. Betas. A few omegas, all claimed, all marked. I noticed that last part immediately. Then I noticed something else. KILLIAN Black didn't touch anyone. Not when an analyst handed him a tablet. Not when a security lead leaned too close to explain a breach. Not even when a junior beta nearly collided with him while sprinting across the floor, panic written all over her face. Everyone adjusted themselves around him instead, orbiting at a precise distance. Like he'd trained the room to know exactly how close was allowed. I watched from the edge, arms crossed, pretending to study a screen while my instincts took notes. A spike of red flared across one of the displays. A route compromise. Voices rose. Chairs scraped back. Stress rippled through the room. KILLIAN didn't raise his voice. Lock down Grid C, he said calmly. Reroute units through secondary access. Pull live feeds from sectors 7 through 9. People moved instantly. No arguing. No hesitation. A problem solver, not a dictator. Still no touch. I waited until the worst of the chaos had smoothed into controlled motion, then stepped closer. Not into his space, just close enough to be noticed. You know, I said, keeping my tone light. Most alphas would have slammed someone against a wall by now. His gaze flicked to me. Sharp. Focused. Most alphas lack discipline, he replied. I tilted my head. Or imagination. That earned me a brief, unreadable look. Afraid I'll bite? I asked, voice low, teasing, dangerous. He didn't smile. I'm afraid you'll stop thinking, Killian said. The words landed harder than any threat. Around us the center hummed, keyboards clacking, voices murmuring, the low pulse of a system constantly on the edge of violence. But the space between us felt taut, stretched thin by something unspoken. You think touching me would break me? I asked. I think it would change the dynamic, he said. And I don't waste tools by dulling them. Tools. There it was. I should have bristled. Maybe I did, just a little. But underneath it, something else stirred. Curiosity, recognition. You keep everyone at arm's length, I said. Even when things get ugly. Distance is clarity, he replied. And control? A pause. Yes. The honesty surprised me. I glanced around again. Alphas commanding rooms through presence and pressure. Omegas moving in careful arcs around them, shaped by invisible lines they didn't dare cross. Killian stood apart from all of it. No scent marking. No casual dominance. Just rules, boundaries, and a silence that made people lean in rather than recoil. I felt it then. That tight coil of tension under my skin, sharper than fear, heavier than desire. This wasn't about restraint. It was about precision. You ever worry, I said quietly, that one day you won't be able to keep your hands clean? His eyes met mine fully now. Dark. Intent. I worry, he said, about touching something I don't intend to own. The words stayed with me long after he turned back to the screens. As I stepped away, pulse steady but electric, I understood something crucial. Killian Black wasn't avoiding contact because he was afraid of losing control. He was avoiding it because he knew exactly how much power a single touch could take away, from both of us. The first shot shattered the night like a bad decision. Glass exploded above my head, raining down in glittering shards as I dove forward, shoulders slamming into the concrete. The data warehouse lights went out all at once, too clean, too fast, and the dark rushed in like it had been waiting its turn. Contact. Someone shouted. No kidding. I rolled, came up behind a server rack and pulled my burner from my pocket with shaking fingers that I refused to acknowledge. Adrenaline made everything sharp, sounds too loud, time too slow. This wasn't supposed to be hot. The warehouse was a ghost node. Obsolete infrastructure. According to BlackWard's own data, it hadn't been touched in weeks. Which meant someone had lied. Bullets chewed into metal inches from my face. I swore under my breath and bolted, sprinting between towering stacks of cold steel and blinking red lights. My boots skidded on the polished floor as I cut left, then right, instinct screaming. They knew I'd be here. Not in a general sense. Specifically. That thought burned hotter than the gunfire. I slipped through a maintenance corridor, shoulder checking a door and slamming it shut behind me. The lock engaged with a whine that was either comforting or a lie. I didn't have time to decide which. I ran. Out into the night, lungs on fire, heart hammering like it wanted out of my chest. The port was alive with motion. Cranes swinging overhead. Cargo containers stacked like uneven teeth. Sodium lights cast everything in harsh orange, shadows stretching long and deceptive. Too open. I veered off my planned route without thinking, ducking between containers and vaulting over a barrier that scraped my palms raw. Footsteps followed, fast and confident. Trained. I forced myself to slow down, to think. They weren't chasing blindly. They were cutting me off. That's when it clicked. I changed direction again, doubling back through a narrow gap I'd memorized years ago. The footsteps hesitated, then adjusted. Still on me. I ducked into cover and pulled up my route history, overlaying it with BlackWard's internal movement logs. The patterns lined up too cleanly. Every time I adjusted, the response came seconds later. Not from the street. From the system. Son of a, I hissed, cutting myself off as a shadow passed overhead. Someone inside BlackWard was watching my routes in real time, feeding them forward. Rage surged up my spine, cold and focused. Not panic. Not fear. Betrayal. I slipped my comm into silent mode and ghosted through the maze, using old tricks, false trails, doubled back paths. Censor blind spots I'd learned back when I was just another Omega trying not to get crushed between packs. A bullet clipped the edge of a container near my head. Close. Too close. I dropped, rolled, and came up firing, not to hit, just to disrupt. The return fire scattered. I took the opening and ran, vaulting over a railing and disappearing down a maintenance ladder just as the port alarms began to wail. By the time I surfaced 3 blocks away, soaked in sweat and river grime, the chase was over. I leaned against a brick wall, breathing hard, hands shaking now that it was safe to let them. Someone had tried to kill me. Not because I'd found the leak. Because I was the leak. Or rather, because wherever I went, the leak followed. My comm buzzed once, then again. Killian. I stared at the screen, jaw tight. Next time, I said when I answered, voice flat and furious. You might want to warn me if your house is wired to watch me bleed. A pause. Then quietly, you're alive. Barely. Good, he said. Then it's working. That did it. My anger sharpened into something lethal. Because now I knew the truth. Someone in KILLIAN Black's inner circle wasn't just selling information, they were hunting me. And if they thought an Omega who survived between packs would roll over just because the bullets got real, they were about to learn how badly they'd miscalculated. KILLIAN Black's office was all glass and shadow. The city spread out beyond the windows, a living circuit board of light and motion, pulsing steadily as if nothing inside me had just snapped. Night pressed close to the glass, turning my reflection into a dark double, eyes too sharp, jaw set too tight. I stood in the center of the room, wet jacket discarded on a chair, blood dried into a thin line along my forearm. No one had tried to touch it on the way up. Of course they hadn't. Killian stood behind his desk, hands folded, posture immaculate. He looked exactly the same as he always did. That made something in my chest burn. You knew, I said. It wasn't a question. He didn't deny it. I suspected, he corrected. I laughed, sharp and humorless. You suspected someone in your system was feeding my movements to the market. So you put me in the line of fire and waited to see who bit. His gaze didn't waver. I put you where you could move, where I could be shot, I snapped. A flicker, something like regret, crossed his face and vanished. You're alive. Barely, I repeated. Again. Silence stretched between us, thick and deliberate. The city outside hummed, uncaring. Finally, Killian exhaled. Slow. Controlled. You weren't the purchase, he said. You were the test. The words landed like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, the room tilting slightly as understanding slammed into place. So that's it, I said quietly. You bought me to flush out a traitor. I bought you because you see what my people refuse to, he said. Because you move between packs without leaving a scent trail. Because if someone followed you, it meant they already had access. Congratulations, I said, bitterness flooding my voice. Your theory checks out. He stepped away from the desk, stopping well short of my space. Always the distance. Always the control. I didn't expect them to move so fast, he admitted. The admission stunned me more than the truth itself. I swallowed hard, anger collapsing into something colder. So what was I asked. Bait? No, he said immediately. Leverage? I barked out a laugh. That's supposed to make me feel better? No, he said. It's supposed to be accurate. For a moment, I couldn't speak. All the pieces clicked together, the contract, the access, the freedom, the refusal to touch. The space he'd given me wasn't respect. It was insulation. You turned me into an instrument, I said finally. Without telling me, yes. The honesty hurt more than any lie. I could have died. You didn't. I stepped forward before I could stop myself, not close enough to touch, close enough to feel the heat of my own anger. You don't get credit for that, I said. You don't get to decide that the risk was acceptable because I survived it. Killian's jaw tightened. That's why you're here. I stilled. What? He reached into his desk and slid my contract across the surface, stopping it halfway between us. You can walk away, he said. Right now, no penalties, no pursuit, no leverage. I stared at the tablet, then back at him. You're letting me go. I'm giving you a choice, he corrected. One I should have given you sooner. The room felt suddenly too quiet. Shock washed through me, cooling the anger into something heavy and uncertain. He wasn't scrambling to keep me. He wasn't asserting dominance or authority. He was opening a door. And for the first time since the auction, I didn't know which side of it I wanted to be on. I looked out at the city again, at the lights, the movement, the endless, dangerous space between packs, then back at KILLIAN Black, standing there in his immaculate distance. "This," I said slowly, "doesn't make us even." "I know," he replied. We stood there, the truth laid bare between us, the pause stretching long and fragile. And in that silence, I realized something that scared me more than the bullets ever had. He wasn't trying to keep me, he was waiting to see what I would choose. Rain has a way of stripping things down to their truth. It soaked through my jacket within minutes, cold and insistent, plastering my hair to my forehead as I walked away from BlackWard without looking back. The streetlights smeared into halos on the wet pavement, each step echoing louder than it should have in my head. I kept walking, past glass towers and shuttered storefronts, past people who didn't know my name and never would. That freedom should have felt like relief. Instead, it felt unfinished. He hadn't stopped me. That was the problem. No pursuit, no command in my ear, no subtle pressure pulling me back into orbit. KILLIAN Black had opened the door and stepped aside, like he trusted me not to burn the place down on my way out. I hated how much that mattered. I ducked under an awning and leaned against a brick wall, rain sliding off the edge in a steady sheet. My pulse finally slowed enough for thinking to catch up. He'd used me. That part was undeniable. But he'd also done something no alpha ever had. He hadn't claimed me, hadn't touched me, hadn't stripped my choices down to survival and obedience. He'd gambled on my ability to see what his system couldn't. And then, when it went wrong, he'd handed control back to me. I laughed quietly, breath fogging in the cold air. "You're an idiot," I muttered. I wasn't sure which of us I meant. The market would still want me. Other packs would still see an Omega without protection as an opportunity. I could disappear, work the edges, survive the way I always had. But now I knew something I couldn't unknow. There was a rot inside BlackWard, and someone was willing to kill to keep it hidden. I straightened, rain dripping from my sleeves, and made my decision. When I turned around, the walk back felt different. Not lighter, clearer. The lobby doors slid open without comment. Security recognized me, hesitated, then stepped aside. No alarms, no questions. KILLIAN was still in his office when I pushed the door open, city lights framing him like a second skyline. He looked up. Didn't ask where I'd gone. Didn't ask why I was back. I closed the distance, still stopping just short of his space, and met his gaze. "I stay," I said. "On my terms." Something shifted in his expression. Not relief. Not triumph. Respect. "Define them," he said. "No more tests I don't know I'm taking," I continued. "No live fire without warning. And if someone inside your council moves against me again, I get to be the one who ends it." A beat. Then, agreed. I blinked. "That easy?" "You're not asking for control," KILLIAN said. "You're asking for clarity." I huffed a laugh. "Careful." That almost sounded like trust. "Almost," he echoed. Silence settled between us, heavy but steady. The storm outside drummed against the glass, loud and relentless, like a heartbeat. I realized then what choice really meant. Not staying because I had nowhere else to go, not leaving to prove I could, but standing in the space between, knowing exactly why I was there. Freedom wasn't the absence of chains. It was deciding which battles were worth staying for. And for the first time since my name disappeared from that glowing panel, I felt something settle into place. I hadn't been claimed. I had chosen. The council chamber was designed to intimidate. Glass walls rose 3 stories high, reinforced and flawless, offering a panoramic view of the city below. Symbols of authority were etched into every surface, old pack sigils rendered in steel and light, history turned into architecture. The floor reflected us all back at ourselves, a reminder that power liked to watch. I walked in beside KILLIAN Black and felt the shift immediately. Not hostility, assessment. The Council of BlackWard Security sat in a semicircle of elevated seats, each member framed by their own transparent panel. Alphas, all of them. Expensively tailored. Carefully neutral scents, teeth hidden behind professional smiles. Predators pretending to be civilized. "This is Rick," KILLIAN said, voice carrying easily across the room. "He's assisting with the leak investigation." Eyes turned to me. I gave them a relaxed nod, hands loose at my sides. Non-threatening. Omegas survive by knowing when to look harmless. "An Omega?" someone murmured. just loud enough to be heard. I smiled. Let them underestimate me. It made the work easier. Then I saw him. ELIAS CROWE sat 2 seats to Killian's left, posture open, expression warm. He looked like trust given human form. Silver at his temples, eyes kind and attentive, a faint smile that suggested he'd already forgiven you for whatever mistake you were about to make. Charismatic. Proper. The kind of alpha people followed without realizing they were being led. Mr. Rick, ELIAS said smoothly, inclining his head. We appreciate your flexibility. Flexibility. That was a word men like him loved to use when they meant compliance. I met his gaze and felt nothing. No pressure. No hunger. Just calculation. Interesting. As the meeting began, I did what I always did. I watched. Not the words, they were rehearsed. I watched the pauses between sentences. The way hands rested on armrests. The subtle flare of nostrils when certain roots were mentioned. The tightening of jaws when Killian spoke. Micro-movements don't lie. When data from the warehouse incident appeared on the central display, I tracked reactions. One alpha frowned too quickly. Another leaned back, scent spiking with annoyance. ELIAS CROWE smiled. Not broadly. Not obviously. Just enough. There it was. The moment was so small I almost missed it, a fractional lift at the corner of his mouth when a compromised access point lit up in red. Satisfaction, quickly masked. My pulse ticked up. I leaned casually against the glass rail, pretending to study the city below. In my reflection, I saw ELIAS shift in his seat, adjusting his cufflinks. He was relaxed. Too relaxed. Killian outlined the failures with clinical precision, his voice steady. This level of access indicates internal authorization. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. An external hack, one council member began. No, ELIAS said gently, lifting a hand. Let's not jump to conclusions. There it was again. The calming influence. The redirect. My attention sharpened to a razor edge. I let my gaze drift back to him, just in time to catch his eyes flick toward me. Curious, measuring, predatory. And then, something else. Recognition. He knew. Not that I'd figured it out yet, but that I was dangerous. I smiled at him, slow and easy. The way you smile at someone who doesn't realize the game has changed. His expression didn't falter. Well, ELIAS continued smoothly, if an omega can move through our systems undetected, perhaps the issue isn't betrayal, but oversight. The room hummed with agreement. I felt the truth settle in my bones, cold and certain. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was him. ELIAS CROWE, the man who looked like stability, who spoke like reason, who hid his teeth behind perfect manners. I glanced at Killian. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The trap was set. And as the council continued to debate, unaware that the predator among them had already been named, at least in my mind, I felt the familiar surge of focus take hold. This wasn't about proving myself anymore. This was about watching the smile crack. And when it did, everyone in that glass-walled room was going to see just how sharp the teeth behind it really were. The port never sleeps. It groans, breathes, shifts, metal on metal, water slapping against concrete. Engines growling like animals that have learned to live in cages. At night the lights turn everything harsh and unreal. Shadows cutting sharp angles between containers stacked like teeth. A fitting place to bare fangs. I knew it was a trap the moment the coordinates came through. Too clean. Too convenient. A data exchange flagged just loudly enough to demand attention, routed through an access point ELIAS CROWE himself had suggested keeping an eye on during the council meeting. He wanted an audience. Still going? Killian asked in my ear as I moved through the maze of containers, rain slicking the ground beneath my boots. I wouldn't miss it, I murmured. Tell your people to stay back. A pause. Rick. I said, stay back. Another pause. Longer this time. Understood. That was trust. Or as close to it as KILLIAN BLACK ever came. I slipped into position, heart steady, every sense tuned razor sharp. The night smelled like salt, oil and anticipation. I let myself be seen, just enough. A shadow crossing light. A footprint left where it shouldn't be. The bite came fast. Gunfire tore through the air, deafening and bright. I dropped, rolled, came up running as bullets sparked off steel inches from my head. Shouts echoed between the containers. Too many voices, moving too well, not street thugs. Professionals. I darted left, then right, drawing them deeper, forcing them to commit. My comm crackled with overlapping chatter. BlackWard frequencies bleeding through channels they shouldn't have access to. Elias wasn't just leaking information. He'd handed them the keys. "Rick." Killian's voice cut in, sharp now. "Get out." "Not yet," I said, breath coming fast. "He's here." As if summoned by the words, a figure stepped into the open space ahead. Calm, unhurried. Flanked by armed men who fanned out with practiced ease. ELIAS CROWE adjusted his coat, as if this were merely another meeting running late. "Impressive," he said, voice carrying easily over the chaos. "I underestimated you." "You underestimated Omegas in general," I shot back, circling slowly. "Common mistake." His smile never wavered. "You were never meant to survive this long." There it was. The truth, finally unmasked. I let the anger burn clean, fuel instead of fire. "You sold routes, timings, people." "I optimized outcomes," Elias corrected smoothly. BlackWard grew complacent. Killian needed a reminder that loyalty is flexible. Shots rang out as BlackWard units finally breached the perimeter, the night erupting into full chaos. Orders shouted. Men scattering. Everything moving at once. Elias took a step back. I moved first. A flashbang detonated near my feet. The world going white and ringing. I hit the ground hard, rolled blindly, and felt pain bloom along my ribs. Someone grabbed for me. I twisted free, drove an elbow back, heard a grunt as they went down. I didn't wait. I ran, not away. Through. Gunfire chased me, close enough to feel the heat. I vaulted a barrier, slid across wet concrete, and came up behind cover as Elias's men scrambled to reposition. He turned, eyes locking on me across the open space. For the first time his smile slipped. Killian emerged from the smoke, weapon raised, fury finally cracking his calm. He moved fast, too fast, and for one suspended second, his hand reached toward me. Almost touched. Then he stopped. I saw the decision in his eyes, the same restraint, the same respect. He trusted me to finish it. I raised my weapon and fired, not at Elias, but at the container crane above him. Metal screamed as the mechanism failed, the massive arm swinging down with catastrophic force. Elias leaped back, barely clearing the impact zone as the ground shattered. BlackWard units surged forward, weapons trained. "Elias CROWE," Killian said coldly, "you're under arrest." Elias looked between us. Breath ragged now, control finally slipping. "You chose an Omega over your council." Killian didn't answer. "I did." "He didn't choose me," I said, stepping into the light. "I chose myself." They took Elias away, his composure crumbling under the weight of exposure. The port slowly quieted, chaos settling into aftermath. Killian approached, stopping just short of me. "You're hurt," he said. "I'll live." His hand hovered, then dropped. "Good." As the sirens faded and the rain washed blood from the concrete, I stood there, bruised, shaking, alive, and understood the truth in my bones. I hadn't survived because I was protected. I'd survived because I refused to be a victim. And no one would ever put me in a glass box again. The roof was quiet in the way only high places ever are. No sirens, no voices. Just wind slipping between buildings, and the distant hum of a city that had already moved on. The night air was cool against my skin, carrying the faint scent of rain and ozone. Below us, the port lights blinked like nothing important had happened. Like no one's world had tilted and reset. I leaned against the low concrete wall, forearms resting on the edge, and stared out at the sprawl. My ribs ached when I breathed too deep. My knuckles were scraped raw. Proof that I was still here. Killian stood a few steps away. Not beside me. Not behind me. Always that distance. "You should be in medical," he said. "I've been worse," I replied. "And I hate fluorescent lights." A pause. Then quieter. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said. "I just didn't have to do it the way the council would have." I glanced at him. His face was turned toward the city, sharp lines softened by the night. For the first time since I'd met him, he looked tired. "You stopped yourself," I said. "Back there?" He didn't pretend not to understand. "Yes." "Why?" The question hung between us, fragile and dangerous. Killian exhaled slowly, as if choosing words was a physical act. "Because if I touched you," he said, "you'd belong." I didn't want that. The wind caught his coat, tugging it back. He didn't move to still it. I laughed quietly, the sound rough around the edges. You realize how insane that sounds to most alphas. I'm aware. Most would say touching is how you protect an omega. And most would be wrong, he replied. I turned fully then, facing him. You think ownership is inevitable. I think it's easy, he said. And I don't take easy paths when they strip someone of their agency. The words landed softly. No drama. No declaration. Just truth. I thought about the auction. The glass booth. The way every alpha in that room had looked at me like a thing to be claimed, shaped, consumed. I thought about Killian walking away without laying a hand on me. How wrong it had felt at the time. How empty. How powerful. You didn't save me, I said slowly. You let me stay myself. Yes. I swallowed, throat tight. That cost you. It did. And you did it anyway. He finally looked at me then. Really looked. You rose because no one forced you to kneel, he said. If I had touched you, marked you, you might have survived. But you wouldn't have become this. Not asset. Not omega. Not bait. Me. The tension between us shifted, deepening into something quieter, and more dangerous than desire. Understanding. Choice. I pushed off the wall and took one step closer. Not into his space. Just enough to close the distance we'd learned to live inside. Just so we're clear, I said, your refusal didn't make things easier. I know. It made them harder. Yes. I smiled then, slow and genuine. Good. The corner of his mouth twitched. Almost a smile. We stood there on the roof, untouched and unclaimed, the city breathing beneath us. And for the first time, I understood the strange, brutal kindness of restraint. He hadn't refused me. He'd refused to take something that wasn't his. And in doing so, he'd given me everything that mattered. The new office smelled like paint, glass, and possibility. Sunlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows, pale gold and unafraid, catching on clean surfaces and unfinished corners. The city looked different at dawn, less sharp, less predatory, honest, in a way it never managed at night. I stood in the middle of it with a cup of coffee that was far too expensive, for how bitter it tasted, and tried not to smile like an idiot. Don't get used to it, I said, glancing around. They'll expect results. They already do, Killian replied. He stood near the window, jacket off, sleeves rolled just enough to look intentional. No guards. No counsel. Just us and the quiet hum of a system being rebuilt. BlackWard Intelligence, Independent Operations. Director, Rick. I snorted. You know they're going to hate that title. Yes, he said calmly. That's part of the point. I leaned against the desk, feeling something unfamiliar settle into my chest. Not triumph. Not relief. Balance. You're really letting an omega run interference on your entire network, I said. Bold move. You're not running interference, Killian corrected. You're shaping outcomes. Semantics. Power, he said, is often semantic. I laughed. The sound easy this time. You realize half the industry thinks I'm your weakness. And the other half thinks you're mine, he replied. That's leverage. I met his gaze. No glass between us now. No shadows. Just morning light and the quiet understanding of two people who'd survived the same fire without standing on each other's bones. So, I said. Partners. Yes. Still not touching? A pause. Then, the faintest hint of amusement. Unless you ask. I raised my hands. Let's not shock the city on day one. We shared a look, equal parts humor and something deeper, steadier. No claims. No marks. No invisible lines drawn by instinct instead of consent. Outside, the city woke up. Inside, for the first time, I didn't feel like I was standing between packs. I felt like I was standing where I belonged. The city still whispers about the Omega who broke the council. Some say I was lucky. Others say I was dangerous. A few insist I was never really an Omega at all, just a convenient anomaly in a system that prefers its stories simple. They're all wrong. I walk the streets differently now. Not hidden. Not owned. People look twice when they recognize me. Some with respect. Some with fear. None with entitlement. Killian Black still doesn't touch me. Not because he can't. Because we chose not to define ourselves that way. There are moments, quiet ones, when I think about the auction. The glass booth. The way my name vanished with a sound softer than breath. I remember the hunger in the room, The certainty that my worth would be decided by someone else. They sold me. That part is true. But they never claimed me. And that refusal, quiet, deliberate, infuriating, gave me room to grow teeth of my own. I wasn't saved. I wasn't owned. I wasn't rewritten to fit someone else's idea of strength. I rose because I chose to. Because someone powerful enough to take everything instead, stepped back and let me remain myself. I was sold. I was not claimed. And that's why I rose.